Hello, friends, and welcome to a Friday edition of Your Daily Detroit. It is April 28th, 2023, coming to you right from next to Spirit Plaza in beautiful downtown Detroit. I'm Jared Stays, and across the table from me is...
Devin O'Reilly, just a couple of spirits of Detroit over here, right? Perched high above the city.
We've got a lot to cover in today's show, but I think we need to start with where we've been. We've got a couple versions of it. I think the first one, where we've been, is where we've both been.
Yeah, Jerry, we had a great little power lunch. We talked about that. You know, it's one of my favorites. So we
had to twist my arm so hard.
Right, of course. Well, we were doing a little bit of work to get together. We do. We'll plug that later. But we're working on something that's kind of working between us, right? Like
absolutely,
collaboration daily in chamber. So we grabbed a little power lunch, and I think both of us had the thought of mind to go somewhere that either we hadn't been before or somewhere that we just hadn't been in a really, really long time. And to me, that was Fishbones. And so we went to Fishbones.
Remember, like, that was the place for so many years.
The big events, the birthdays, the graduations, the proms, like Fishbones. That was a place to go.
Mm-hmm. I think for some people it still definitely is, but I hadn't had the chance to go in a while. And, everyone's been talking about Greektown, whatever. It's like, you know what? Let's spend some money in one of Detroit's more known neighborhoods. And I got to say, it's been a while. I know from friends that it's actually been a long time since they shut down the fountain. But other than that, kind of how I remembered it.
Yeah, about the same. I mean, again, you get older, it doesn't have the same luster. Again, now with all the grand places that have been built downtown and all of the really kind of amazing architecture and things like that, it used to almost be going into like a theme park. Like you were in like a rainforest cafe of sorts. Now, not as much, especially with the fountain turned off. But it does still feel really cool. It feels kind of eventful. The crowd was sparse, but as you said, it depends on what perspective you're looking at. From a downtown Detroit post-COVID lunch crowd, wasn't bad.
Not bad. They kind of pushed all the people over to that area by the fountain because it's kind of divided into two sections. You've got that area by the fountain, and then you go right, and it's the area by the street there. And that's usually, that one feels a little bit more New Orleans to me and always has that side.
Right.
But I mean, solid lunch. Had a good time. You really enjoyed your jambalaya.
Yeah, the jambalaya was great. I asked the waiter, as I like to do, get a tip from the people who see what's being made.
He was direct. He was
direct. He said the jambalaya. So had the jambalaya. It was fantastic. It's pricey side for lunch, but again, downtown Detroit lunch, you kind of expect to pay that.
Well, and if you're going to go out for lunch, because so many people do eat at their desk or whatever, sometimes it's fun to go out and try something.
Yeah.
Or like just go splurge a little bit. I mean, look. We could have splurged even more because we could have gone to the place that both of us haven't been before. And I would love to hear from a listener if you've been here. But we thought about the Sugar Factory.
I just couldn't mentally do the goblets, milkshakes, and all of the.
I mean, a goblet at noon just doesn't really make sense to me.
No, it's like then we're taking a nap and we never record the show. That's basically what happens.
So yeah, it has been a crazy week. There's a lot to talk about. I haven't really had a chance to too much talk about it, but I'm back from out of town.
Yeah, we got to do a little debrief with you because the Where Have You Been is a little more involved because you went somewhere. We teased it. I mean, you went to Brooklyn. We teased it last show. You went to Brooklyn. You were in New York for a while, and I'm interested to hear how that went and the parallels, of course, to Detroit.
Yeah, I think there are some interesting things to talk about. But first, I want to talk about something I think close to everyone's hearts, and that is Detroit-style pizza.
Do they have it in Brooklyn?
They do. They do. There's a multitude of places. And they also have it throughout New York. This particular time, I had made it over onto Manhattan, and in the West Village, there is a place called Village Square Pizza right near where the old Stonewall Inn was. Right there over on, like, right in that whole historic area where kind of like the LGBTQ rights movement like had a really big moment. Village Square Pizza is there. It's kind of like a merge of like New York grandma pizza and also like the Detroit style. I was very intrigued to try it. I have strong feelings because, Detroit style, I feel like it's important that it's like credited to Detroit. On the other hand, I feel like there were some twists. I think anytime a dish travels, it ends up picking up new qualities. And this one was interesting to me because I had never done hot honey on a pizza.
Well, I've done it here. I actually haven't done it on a Detroit-style pizza. I had it, I want to say it like Jolly Pumpkin or maybe like a Trumbull and Porter.
Okay. Apparently it's all the thing out east. I haven't had it here. I didn't have it till I get out east. Out east, apparently it's all the rage.
But I've had honey on a pepperoni pizza, and it was really good, but I don't know if it translates to Detroit-style pizza.
Well, it did a nice job of getting it. So they had the pepperoni that kind of cups That kind of old style
yeah.
pepperoni got in there. But I didn't like it. I got a specific reason why.
Okay, because I did. I felt like it offered a little extra sweetness to offset the saltiness of the pepperoni, and it was kind of a little more of a savory flavor from the honey, the thickness of the honey.
It turns my pizza slice from handheld to being a knife and forker. And I don't knife and fork my pizza. I just don't. I don't care where I am. The square, one of the reasons I like the Detroit style pizza, it's a nice, good size square you can just grab onto. And when you're in New York, you're doing a New York slice, you do the fold and you go in there. I think silverware and pizza is sacrilege.
Well, that's fine, but I didn't experience any of this. So I think either you had too much hot honey on your pizza.
Because it was just dripping dripping down my hand. I had to like get the hand sanitizer. It was just way too much.
No.
Like, it was just like not my experience.
Then I'm going to say it, they did it wrong. That was either too much honey or maybe hot honey does belong on a New York / triangle style pizza. Because I agree, the times I had it drizzled on there, lightly drizzled, I could just kind of fold the slice up, made it a lot easier to eat. So I would not do it on a big kind of square rectangle slice.
Interesting. Yeah. It tasted good, but I was like, I wish I had known ahead of time and I would have broken my rules because you have to. But it does kind of change the thing is, as I said to me, now, what are your rules around pizza? I want to hear them because we're going to be doing a lot more pizza content going forward with some good friends of the show. I'm really excited about this.
So aside from the pizza observations, Jer, what else did you notice about Brooklyn that kind of either reminded you of what we don't do in Detroit, what we could do in Detroit, or what we're just not going to do?
I mean, for one, it's people everywhere. And I'm not going to talk about Manhattan's its own island into itself. I want to talk about Brooklyn specifically. And I was in an area, I spent most of my trip in an area of about 3 miles where there was subway service to everything. I was 0.2 miles or less from getting to anywhere. There were walkable grocery stores. Like you could do the entire trip in the neighborhood if you so desired. And it's the density. It shocked me even more when I got back. I went to that Ford Mobility event and I'm driving down 14th Street and it's basically rural. Like there's nothing there. Or when I go down Warren, I went down Warren in this time, West Warren, and we've demolished so much. I got a press release in my inbox. It ended up being postponed, but there's an event where the administration is going to celebrate more demolition. I grew up on the east side. You know, my first place that I lived in was Van Dyke, kind of inside of Mac in a duplex. We ended up leaving because my front porch fell off. And a true story, as a kid, the thing is that there were houses everywhere. And I know, like, even driving around that area of like West Village, Indian Village, you get outside of the quote unquote hot areas, everything's gone. And it's psychologically so jarring. And to juxtapose that into a Sunday, very quiet, but there's still people out walking their dogs. There's people running around doing their thing. Like it settled in for me. The city was 1 million people within my lifetime. And I feel like density is key. And we talk about all the things about talent attraction. I want to shout out Sam over at Axios because he writes some really interesting stuff. And he's had some Twitter threads talking about attracting talent and all that other stuff and needing trans and all this other stuff. But here's the thing. What if, and of course we all know the Q line could connect more. And I completely agree. And everything I say here, I'm going to preface with, I fully support more transit in Metro Detroit. I always have. I have receipts of it, all that. But what if we also looked at the Q line problem, if we were to fix its timing issues, as not just where it goes, but how many people are near it? What if we looked at it where it's like, what if there were 100,000 people in the next 3 miles up, down Woodward? I think about, you look at Brooklyn and its population, it is half the size of Detroit, but it has a multiple. I think it's like 2.5 million people in an area half the size of Detroit. Now, I know we're not going to get there. We're never going to get there.
I was going to say, you can't. We're not Brooklyn.
And I think we have to think about that in the transit conversation too. We need to start being realistic about like what services can be provided, what are we willing to pay, and what if we truly decided to focus our development efforts in the ways that people are interested in. So a thing that came up recently, and I'm sorry, I'm going off a little bit here, but like Livonia, there's some council people who are very upset that the city of Detroit under the new plan is going to have a couple of stops in Livonia for buses because Detroit has residents that are workers that need to get to Livonia. And they're upset about it. Here's the deal. Like, I don't think Livonia is ever going to sign up for any kind of density like you see in Chicago or Brooklyn.
They don't want it.
No. I don't think most suburbs in Detroit, like you're never going to see it in Sterling Heights.
They don't want it.
They don't want it.
So it is important. I take my hat off. And again, people may not realize this, but again, I've got the receipts. I am pro-transit. I vote for every friggin' transit thing that comes up on the ballot.
In your work, you have advocated for
we've
transit.
advocated for transit. I am happy to pay more taxes for transit. But I also recognize that you can't ram this down people's throats. And there are huge areas, you could say cities, counties in some cases.
Even in the city of
They
Detroit,
just don't want it. And you have to understand that, like, in some cases, if you're a huge, huge transit advocate, I respect you, but I also think you have to take a step back and question, do enough people actually want this? And I don't know if that's a yes.
The question to ask is, what is the job to do of anything that we need to have? And like, look, there's transit in the New York area to all kinds of low density areas. So I think it would be great to have like a line that goes out to specific places, to some of these more populated suburbs, have things that connect in. Absolutely. But if you want that kind of regular service, we need to think differently. We need to think, if we are truly, like I saw these tweets from Sam about attracting talent, having this walkability, whatever, then you have to build in that density. You have to think about, we need to build places that are townhouses that have apartments downstairs, right? Or 3 apartments in one thing. And maybe there are some larger developments, but maybe there's some much more street level stuff where we just say we're going to make blocks of this stuff so that we have enough volume for people to live in.
I totally agree. And I think that's, selfishly, obviously, I very pro economic development and building dense urban areas. And so I think when we do have this conversation about transit, I almost think it's us looking at, let's build the density. And that's how we can make a case for transit. Because like you said, we can't make a really compelling case right now that people in Livonia need transit. But if you can build up density in certain areas, whether that be Royal Oak, Ferndale, different nodes, Dearborn, parts of Detroit, if you can build these nodes, then you can say, okay, these are the things we need to connect. Because right now, saying that we need to connect Canton and Detroit, I think resoundingly people might say, no, we don't really need to. There's not enough people.
Twitter does, but the rest of the voters, what I'm saying is beyond a basic level. So I am really glad that the transit millages passed, but this is a very basic level of service. And when you go spend time on a transit system that is real, like Chicago, and I have, or Detroit, and I have, or Columbus, which is growing, and I have, there is a huge shift. I think about it this way. In sports, you can look at the data of something. And I've got friends who are like, the population density of blah, 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 blah. No. If you walk on the street for 2 days, you can feel the difference in an instant. There's a difference between what you see in the data and how it plays on the field. And how Detroit plays on the field is very separated. And if we want to go ahead and encourage this young talent, like we keep talking about, we need to be intentional about it. We also need to be honest about the fact that there are many Detroit neighborhoods, they don't like bike lanes. I can't tell you how much pushback I get from listeners, from block club captains, from different folks where they're like, you know what? I don't want all that stuff. I want Detroit's comeback to look like my neighborhood did in the past, which was basically a lot of Detroit was built in a suburban style. That's a tension that we don't admit is real.
And it's something that I think people need to be conscious of as they're thinking about this, and look at your own self, look at your situation. And I think I've heard from people, and I think there is a sentiment where folks in Detroit who are reliant on public transportation like buses, they don't wish for better buses. They don't wish for nicer buses or faster lanes. What they really would like is to have a living wage and being able to afford a car. That's what they really want.
And people don't like it when it's like, oh, well, you got to pick areas. I'll say something I've said in the past before. Not all 139 square miles of Detroit is coming back. You can see that now. And if you're not honest about it, you're lying to yourself. It requires so much money and economic development, billions upon billions upon billions. You think the district of Detroit is big? You think Detroit, I went to Hudson Yards. That's 20 billion and walked the High Line.
Hey, did you like Hudson Yards?
Gorgeous.
Guess who's building that? Or guess who built that?
Stephen Ross.
There you go. And
it was interesting because I talked to some people there. It was like, well, why are people in Detroit kind of whatever about the district of Detroit development? And once you have the Ilitch context, then people understood, right? Because it's been sitting for so long. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to Ross himself, nobody has any doubt that he'll get it done.
That's my point, and I'll say it again. Related companies and Stephen Ross are building these projects on Ilitch land, and that's a big difference.
Oh, 100%. Because you know what? They weren't going to get built as Ilitch properties.
No.
Or as Ilitch.
No, I'll agree.
They don't have the experience.
Yeah, I would agree to that. I'd be the first one to agree with that. So, yes. Side tangent.
So really, we need to look at what is the future. Do we want to attract that young talent? If we identify that young talent needs those things, then we have to build them. But we have to build them next to each other. We can't build them a little bit out in Sterling Heights and a little bit over here. Now, if a suburb wanted to volunteer and say, hey, we're going to upzone our density and we're going to be part of this, I think that's great. I think that's fine. The city says we're going to upzone and say we're going to take away some of these parking minimums. And I know they're starting to in certain areas, but say this is what we're going to do here. And then say, okay, we're going to track the dollars because you know what? Affordable housing requires subsidy. And that leads me to a listener letter from Jason who asked basically, why is it that there are no affordable apartments in that riverfront development coming along? It's the first all glass development in Detroit on the old Joe Louis site.
Yeah, we can actually see it from where we are today.
Yeah,
recording the podcast. So it does look very sparse. And I think, again, let's level set because I think it's important. Context is important. If you look at it right now, you're like, why are they building this shoeboxy type tower in the middle of seemingly like nothing else? And then the answer is there's going to be more. We've got Huntington building hotels. We have the West Riverfront being built up. So like, I know it looks like it's in the middle of nowhere now.
The extension of the convention center.
There's going to be
it's
more
also
stuff
the
around
land
it.
they could get a hold of due to the bankruptcy
But
deal.
frankly,
let's be honest.
Yeah, but all things aside, right now, all they got is this one tower, 25-story tower, which doesn't look too innovative, let's say. Maybe that it's very utilitarian, but all glass. You said the first all glass residential. It's
Thank
gonna
you
be
to
all,
Urbanize Detroit for that information.
all residential. And I don't know, it's billing itself as kind of like prime location. Right now, I can tell you, and you can agree, Jerry, that's not prime location.
If you like looking at the water without a balcony and you want to be on the riverfront, it is a prime location in the same way that Riverfront Towers is, but it doesn't have a lot of stuff around it.
No.
You're going to have to get on the people mover. You're going to have to go through Kobo. You're going to have to do things to reach things.
Yeah, you're basically in a concrete enclave there.
A
Not by
conclave?
Sure, a conclave. And, we haven't seen numbers, I don't think yet, on what the rents are going to be, but I believe they're going to be pretty high. And guess what? There is no affordable units, and they don't have to because they didn't take any tax incentives.
And so that gets into the question. It is impossible financially to build affordable units, even in smaller scales. It's almost impossible, basically impossible, without subsidy. And so the question becomes, do we want to give subsidy to create these affordable units, or do we want no subsidies and we get no affordable units? And I wish this wasn't the decision. I wish this
but it's
wasn't
an
the
either or.
case.
Let's be fair. It's an either or. I mean,
There's
you
no
can't-
middle,
yeah, you
especially
can't-
with the cost of labor,
there's no
construction,
C.
everything else
There's
nowadays.
no choice C here.
And I wish there was. I've heard of some great community-focused things that people want to do, talking in different neighborhoods about a community-built residential that doesn't have it's basically done by a nonprofit. I think some of that stuff is innovative and great, and I think it would be great if it happened, but we're still at the model stage. We're still at the prototype stage. Most stuff is going to be more like this. And so if you go and say, I don't want any subsidies, then you also have to accept that these rents are going to be astronomical.
Mm-hmm. Well, astronomical for Detroit and
For Detroit.
the area. But again, this is kind of the free market side of it, is we can bemoan how high the rents are. But at the end of the day, if they can find someone to pay those, and sometimes, believe me, sometimes I sit and I look at the rents and I'm like,
walking past
who
the
can
exchange and
who
wondering
is
who's
affording
going to buy
Who
this?
is going to buy this? And if we're right and no one can, then guess what? They either have to lower the prices or, go bankrupt. But if they can get people, then I guess who am I to say, that it's too expensive if someone can pay for it and they can fill that building.
Yeah. So, that's definitely a big thought, is that we need to be really developing in an intentional way where, you can just walk to the grocery store. Now, that leads me to another point, Devin. We were talking about this off air. How important is some of that regional transit if you're trying to attract workers who are working from home or working with companies that, let's say you live along Woodward and you pick up a job working at this Ford Mobility Hub or all the other things that are happening. How often are you going to Livonia? If you have enough people that the businesses open up, it was weird for me to be in a center city and there was a Best Buy and a Five Below in downtown Brooklyn, right? All the things that you'd find on that mall, to give you some context, over in Allen Park, there's that hill that has
The landfill.
The landfill, right. It's got all those stores and whatever. Almost all the stores you can find are all in downtown Brooklyn. They're all there because the people are there. That comes in the challenge. So in recent news, the Metro Times reported, and a lot of social media people were upset. And look, I think the price is ridiculous. I would tell Phil that to his face, who runs that Prince Cafe in Core City. He's charging $1.80 for
Phil Kafka.
Yeah, for a peeled carrot.
Yeah, naked carrot.
The naked carrot. Do I think it's ridiculous? Absolutely. But as I drove by it this morning, I went, who's going to frequent? How are there enough? There is a need for a grocery store to serve the people there, but there's nowhere enough people to create a grocery store.
No, not the
And
density.
that's the problem.
And we need density.
Right. It's that density. And when he talked about he wanted to start, do I think a little bit of it's absurd? Sure. But on the other hand, everyone's now talking in a way about putting a grocery store in that neighborhood where that was not part of the conversation at all. So in some ways, Was it kind of brilliant to be able to troll a little bit and be like, maybe we do need to have a conversation about healthy food?
However you get to the end result, as long as it's the right result, I don't care. I'm more of a means to an end type of person. So however you get to it, if we can create more density, if we can get grocery stores and places that people can frequent in neighborhoods, I don't care how you do it, frankly, but we need more people. And that goes to, like, again, downtown even. Downtown is so far from being as dense enough. And there's another story, the Buell building.
Yeah.
That was another story that came out this week, was that the Buell building is going to be converted to residential. I say bring it on. Clearly, we can all agree, Jerry. I'm bullish as hell on, the future of downtown and the business community. But even I recognize not all the offices are coming back. We will never get back to pre-pandemic levels of office occupancy. So how do we offset that? How do we, make use of that space? It's residential. Residential is what we do need and what there is still a demand for.
Mhm.
And so the Buell, I'm really optimistic because it's not a new build. The Buell building is not in the best shape, Jer, but it's not in terrible shape. I've actually been in there a few times, and I know some people who have had offices there. It's not as bad as like Penobscot. So I would hope that the turnaround, the redevelopment on that won't be as expensive, and then that makes the margins easier to have residential that doesn't cost, astronomical sums. So I love the idea of converting that to residential.
Another residential possibility. And I do want to get into more development stuff. I was hoping to have Robin Runyon on in this episode, but it just didn't work out for timing from Urbanize. Hope to have her early next week, to talk about even more stuff. But I know that something came across our transom was this story from Cranes about the office tower that is right on the other side of the lodge, right next to Corktown. We've talked about the possibilities there. Now, Kirk Pinho reports that it's actually in pretty bad shape, not in good repair whatsoever. I'll link to it in the show notes to check it out. But basically, it is now in receivership, and it's been empty for a really long time. And I look at those buildings and I go, that should be apartments, or that should be converted somehow, or something should be done with that space. Because think about it, that's one place where you could have residential towers and you're going to the bagel shop, or you're going to the coffee shop at James Oliver, or you're going to Mudgie's, you're going to Batch Brewing, and you have all of that stuff right there. I feel like that's a prime opportunity. It's a real shame that it's in receivership now because no one's able to get it moving.
It literally straddles downtown and Corktown. You have a dense single-family neighborhood in Corktown adjacent to it with pretty high levels of income. You've got all the amenities you could possibly want, at least in Corktown. And you don't have you have Honeybee. So you have
it's not right around the corner, but it's definitely bikeable and reachable.
And so you have a lot of jobs located there. So like that tower, for me, and I didn't realize how bad it was inside, but I've often looked at that. I actually stared at it this past weekend because I was at Brew Detroit. And I said, what in the heck is going to happen to that tower? Why is more not happening? And it sounds like it's in pretty rough shape inside, but to me, it just seems like an incredible opportunity.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that density needs to be all across even the city of Detroit. The thing is about, there is that map, and I get hell if I ever mention it because they get mad, where it's like Manhattan, San Francisco, and Boston inside Detroit. And people go, well, that's not fair, blah, blah, blah. I think it's an example of numbers versus like the street level. And on the street level, you could designate an area of the city that's more dense. And this happens in all kinds of cities. You have a more dense area. And you know what? University district should stay university district, right? It doesn't have to pop up. Maybe you do some apartments or something like on one of the main thoroughfares, or you do a couple of things that are 2 or 3 stories. We need to look at Detroit as a mosaic of neighborhoods, a patchwork, and understand that different things are going to work in different areas. And that's okay. Like saying that, all Detroit this or all Detroit that, even all of any of the larger suburbs, the scale and size, that's what hit me, is that we're talking about square mile. It's not 20s.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And every neighborhood has a personality, and they're all unique, and they're all amazing in the city of Detroit and even beyond. Every community has a personality and kind of a story to tell. But at the same time, the other side of that is, if you're going to be a spread out community with large houses or nice lawns or whatever, you desire in your community, you can't expect the powers that be to plop a Target or a Trader Joe's in your backyard because the density isn't there and the money isn't there. You know what I mean? It's like you can't have it both ways.
Well, and I think there's a lot to be discussed about this, and there's a lot of thoughts. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think. dailydetroit@gmail.com. If you think I'm crazy, I feel like it's just something where it was perspective. You get to a certain point, with everything that's been going on here, you know what? We just need to look at the reality on the ground.
Perspective is a good word of the day. I don't know if we do I don't know if we do word of the days, but I think perspective is a good word of the day. I think everyone should take a step back sometimes and ask themselves, what are the people who disagree with me saying about this?
And that should go for the other side too.
Yeah, no,
Absolutely. Like, what are the things that people who are very passionate about transit, and I am one of them, what are the things that we feel like we're missing?
people need to make the argument against themselves sometimes, just to give themselves perspective.
For sure, for sure.
Said a lot, Jer. We had some really good themes, I think. Less all around today, kind of we were focused, but I think it was some good conversation. I think it's what the people like.
Well, of course, if you've got ideas, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Thank you to our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit. And to our newest member, Tracy. Thank you so very much. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
I'm Devin O'Reilly.
Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.